Hi, everyone. Welcome to Teaching and Leading with Resilience for Virtual Rock Ed Camp 2020. My name is Garrett Miller. I will get into a little bit of an introduction here in just a moment. I just want to let you know the format will be, obviously I'm in a Google Meet right now, and I'm going to present my screen. I'll be using some slides to explain the concepts that we'll be discussing today. So bear with me while I share my screen. Okay. So, a little bit of a background about myself. I am a social studies teacher at Slippery Rock Area High School, and I'm also a first lieutenant in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. The reason that I felt inclined to do a session on this particular topic is that through the Army, I was able to go to a Master Resilience training in 2018, and I am now the Master Resilience Trainer for our battalion. That was in Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. It's a 21-day course, and it was all classroom based. And as you can see here from the title slide, all of that information, all of the studies, all of the research comes from the University of Pennsylvania. So what the United States Army did was they teamed up with UPenn due to the psychological effects that were being put on soldiers, from different experiences, and due to, unfortunately, the high suicide rate in the military. Resilience doesn't have to be something extreme like that. Obviously, you can use resilience in your everyday life. And the spin that I'm going to put on it here, kind of combining my two worlds together, is to, as the title states, give you and your students some meaningful skills that you can hopefully use, not just in the classroom, but just in your everyday life. So the bottom line up front is that you can become a more resilient individual. Just like many things in life, we talk about the nature-nurture debate. You might think that some people just don't have the ability to ever, be resilient or get over things. Maybe they're just not tough. Or the contrary, maybe some people you think like, wow, that person just has an innate ability to deal with adversity. But the bottom line up front is that this is a skill, right? It's like training a muscle. You can grow in the sense of resilience. So that's a big thing to keep in the back of your mind, whether you're thinking about this on a personal level about yourself, or if you're thinking about it for your students at any level, that it is something that you can enhance. So the things we're going to get into here today are everything's broken down into skills and competencies that really contribute to resilience. So before we do that, important to give you some guidelines on what resilience actually is. I think in the wake of the pandemic, especially this year and everything being what it is, I think that resilience is being talked about a lot more, whether it's in the news or just general word of mouth. But people are talking about being resilient, right? Dealing with some sort of adversity, and we've had plenty of it in 2020. So a couple visuals here. We have our tennis ball, and then we have an egg. Now you can see that our egg is not fully intact because resilience is, in my own words, it's what you do or how you react to a situation that is undesirable, right? So when stuff happens, when you smack a wall, so like our good trusty tennis ball here, if you throw that tennis ball at a wall, right, it is going to bounce off of that wall and it's going to be just fine, right? It's not going to be harmed in any way. It hit that obstacle in front of it, but it was able to keep going. Now the egg, on the other hand, you guys can tell what happens to it when it hits a wall. So we all want to be that tennis ball. Now notice I didn't say you bounce back from adversity. A lot of people use that definition. They use in a few moments the definition I'm going to show you is going to talk about that. But I think that when it comes to being a resilient individual, you don't just want to survive, right? You don't want to experience some sort of trauma or some sort of hardship and say, well, I'm right. Okay, I conquered that obstacle because I'm right where I was before. I would say you don't want to just survive, you want to thrive. So I avoid using that term bounce back because as crazy as it may sound, you do really want to try to grow from each and every negative experience that you have, that you're going to go through. So a few definitions here. You can see resilience, the ability to grow and thrive in the face of challenges and from adversity. And then a resilient individual is someone who's willing to take calculated, necessary risks to capitalize on opportunity. Risk taking is something that maybe you don't necessarily see the connection between risk taking and resilience, but hopefully some of the skills that we highlight here are going to bring that to light. So you'll see this slide in particular a few times, and we'll highlight several of these skills. So these are the 14 resiliency skills that we are going to be talking about, or the ones that were taught during my Master Resilience training that I went to, like I said, 21 days. As you can probably assume, my 21-day course isn't going to fit into the roughly hour-long session that I'm recording right now. So we will mainly focus our attention on these top 8 here, and understand that I'm just simply skimming the surface of each one of these skills. From 9 through 14, a lot of those require a lot of role play, a lot of actual communication. And due to the current circumstances, with this being a virtual session, it would be really difficult, I think, if I tried to explain those individually, just sitting here solo. So for those reasons, the combination of time and the lack of collaboration we can have, I'm going to focus on those top 8 skills. So those skills are essentially your, think of it as like your toolkit, your tool belt, however you want to, whatever analogy you'd like to use. And then these are the competencies that those skills are going to enhance. So these are things that all of us have some level of comfort with, or that all of us are, we have these competencies in some way, shape, or form, some of us better than others. But these competencies are really, if you can enhance your ability to have these 6 competencies, you are going to see yourself become, or see your students become, much more resilient individuals. So we'll go through a breakdown of each of these 6 on the following slides. But one that I want to highlight right now is that number 3, optimism. A big point of emphasis is that when we talk about being resilient, we're going to give several scenarios of facing hardship or facing adversity. The biggest thing I think with resilience is just having realistic expectations, right? You're not going to be a bright ray of sunshine every single day. Maybe you are. If you are, you're better than me. But you're not going to. The expectation isn't that when something catastrophic happens, that you're just all sunshine and rainbows and everything's great. But more so optimism, in a sense that your thoughts are full of hope. Your thoughts are full of productive thoughts, right? Things that aren't going to put you in a downward spiral, things that aren't going to just be counterproductive, right? Just complaining the entire time. That doesn't help the situation at all. So just optimism in a way of how can you make the best, right? Kind of like the silver lining. How can you make the best of a certain situation? So the first 2 competencies, self-awareness, self-regulation. Self-awareness is extremely important, right? There's a reason that UPenn put this as number 1. You have to know and be able to identify your strengths and your weaknesses, maybe some of your character flaws and things like that, in order to understand the actions that the way you react to certain situations. And we'll go through several different scenarios here in the following skills, but there might be things that really just set you over the edge, when you reflect back on them at the end of the day, you're like, why did I do that? Right? Why did I yell at that student? Or, why did I take that so personally when so-and-so said this? And if you can kind of do some soul searching to figure out what your, maybe your core values and things like that are, that helps explain some of those maybe disconnecting, consequences to those actions. So I'm going to show you a survey here in a few moments that will really help out you and your students. I think it's a great tool that you can use at any level to to really just kind of hone in on doing that self-reflection, right? Doing that soul searching to figure out what makes you you. So that is the first competency. Competency 2 is self-regulation. So now that you have some self-awareness, right? How can you use what you have? How can you use those values? How can you leverage those to your advantage? Being able to regulate your emotions, being able to regulate even your thoughts, right? We all have that voice in our head that, whether it is when we're bored at a presentation like the one you're listening to right now, hopefully not, or whether it is when you're listening to an excuse from a certain student, right? Trying to not necessarily get rid of that voice in your head, but make sure that it's not counterproductive thinking, right? And again, making sure that you're able to express those emotions appropriately. I already hit on optimism, so I'm not really going to talk about competency number 3 too much. There'll be a whole skill on hunting for the good stuff. But really, the way this was taught to us was that it's just science catching up with grandma. Counting your blessings, really just seeing the silver lining in every single scenario, what good can come out of whatever the situation may be. Number 4 is one that I think that teachers probably are better at than most people, and maybe they don't even realize it, but having some mental agility, right? Any problem that comes your way, and whether that is something large scale, a large scale problem like maybe someone gets diagnosed with some sort of terminal illness, maybe someone passes away, or it could be everyday things. It could be anything that, the copier's down and you didn't make copies of your test. And what are you going to do first period? It could be something like, the Wi-Fi is down in school and you have no internet, but your lesson for the entire day rely on you, being online, or the students using Chromebooks. Having that mental agility, right? Trying to go through those hoops and figuring out, okay, now what, right? How can I be creative? How can I be flexible in this situation? And again, I think teachers are really good at that. So there's a competency that we probably all have a one-up on others. 5, strengths of character. Again, we'll get into that here in just a moment with the VIA character strengths survey. That way, once you know what your strengths of character are, how can you leverage on those? And really, just giving yourself credit for those being your strengths, right? Because that makes you unique. Whatever your top 3 or top 5 character strengths are, it's not to say that there aren't other people with those top 5 or top 3, but it's very unlikely that everyone that you work with has those same strengths. So how can you use those to your advantage? And then number 6, one that's kind of hard to do right now, with this being a virtual section, is connection, right? Being able to build those relationships, which personally, with my educational philosophy, I think that relationships are some of the most important parts of what we do. So it might seem a little strange at first to think, how can relationships or how can connections make you a more resilient individual or help you help others become more resilient? But once you can build that connection with somebody, now you have a support system, right? Or now you are someone's support system. So it's really important to leave that door wide open for you to be able to, build those relationships with other people and maintain those relationships, whether it's with the staff, whether it's with the students, or whether it's in your personal life. Just making sure that you're able to have those great connections with others. So going to go off the presentation here for a moment. So the VIA Character Strength Survey, you can see this link and you're watching this as a video, so feel free to pause it. Or you can just simply Google VIA Character Strength Survey, and it'll be one of the first ones that pop up. So I'm going to click this hyperlink here. Should kick us, to this page here. So you can see that it's going to ask me to sign in. If you don't have an account, which I assume most of you don't, you would just click please register here, and all it's going to ask you for is your email and your password. It's not going to spam you. They don't send you, they don't flood your inbox. They only send you the results of your survey, and that is it. So I'm going to sign in here, and I already took the survey, but I'm just going to go back to like the main screen here. So if I go up here to the top right, it's going to say take the free survey. I'm going to click that. And this is actually new. I haven't logged into this for several months, and it used to just be one, character strength survey. But now, and this is even better for our profession, they have a VIA adult survey and then the VIA survey for youth. So if you wanted to do this as maybe a beginning of the year activity just to get to know your students, maybe you're incorporating this as part of a college and career lesson, that would certainly be a tool that you can use. And again, it's totally free. They do have some options like pro accounts and things like that that you can pay for. You can see there's promotion, create your pro site now. But from where I'm sitting, I think that you could do, the options are endless with the things that you can do once you have this character strength profile. So I'm just going to act like I'm going to take the survey here real quick so you guys can see what it looks like. But you can see these I statements here. I have many interests. I am an extremely grateful person. And then it's just a continuum over here on the right that says how much or how little that is like you, right? If you feel like, yeah, that's something that I would say, or that's something that my friends would describe me as, then you would obviously click very much like me, and so on and so forth. It does take a while. I would say conservatively, like if you are actually sitting here doing everything the way that you're supposed to be doing it, actually reading each one and reflecting on your life and your thoughts and the person that you are, it probably will take you somewhere in the ballpark of like 10 to 15 minutes. For students, my big recommendation would be if you are going to have them take this survey, it's all in how you pitch it, right? Because there's nothing on the platform that's going to prevent, Johnny from just clicking neutral for every single one, or just clicking, just randomly clicking buttons throughout this. So it's you have to pitch this in a way that, hey, once you know yourself, it's going to give me a better idea of who you are. It's going to give you a better idea of who you are, right? And all the positive benefits that can come with that. So you just keep on clicking through if you're interested in taking that survey. I want to show you the report. So I'm just going to click this My Account button here. And you can see my top strength is right there. So I'm going to select my character strength profile. Now, all these other reports that they can run, they cost money, right? So if I wanted my VIA Pro, I'd have to pay $40 for that. I don't think that's necessary. If you feel inclined to do so, go for it. So if I look at my character strength profile, you can see here that it says that my greatest strength is honesty. And if I hover over that, it just has a little 1 to 2 sentence description of exactly what that means. Now, if I scroll down through here, right, you can see it's from 1 to 24. And as I look at each one of these, I can see what it means, right? One that I want to point out here is this appreciation of beauty and excellence. So when I was in Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, there was a gentleman there who looked like a real life G.I. Joe action figure, except for he was covered in tattoos, but big, rough and tough, burly guy. And it was a requirement that we took this survey prior to taking the course in Fort McCoy. And he had his printout and he was just ready to tear this thing up one side and down the other because his number one character strength was appreciation of beauty and excellence. And he was like, that's a bunch of baloney. Like, that's not me. I'm not someone who just stands there and stares at the sky or whatever. And after the instructor explained it, they said, like, what's your job? And he explained that he's an infantry squad leader and that he, leads people to clear rooms and do things like that. And they were like, okay, well, like if your squad's working on that and they're the best, like they're the fastest, they do it fluidly, like flawless, no issues at all, is that something that you would be like proud of? And he was like, yeah, heck yeah. Like I love to see all of that planning come together. And they were like, all right, well, check it out, right? It's noticing and appreciating beauty and excellence and or skilled performance in various domains of life. So it's not what meets the eye, right? He interpreted that appreciation of beauty and excellence to be something completely different than what the character strength actually means. And it's important to also make sure that your students don't look at this and say, I don't know, maybe for me, I really wanted, I think I'm a brave person, so I wanted bravery to be number one, and it's not. Don't let your students get away with denouncing it just because it doesn't say what they want it to say. You can take the survey multiple times. You can have students, maybe that's a way to show growth or show change over time if you haven't taken the beginning of the year, end of the year. But just highlighting that, like, hey, you might not be who you think you are, or like just because you're number 12 bravery doesn't make you a not brave person, right? That you are able to leverage on these strengths. And remember, 1 through 24, they're all strengths, right? You might have an area of strength in each one of these. It's just ranking them based on the way that you answer the questions. So, you look at my bottom 5 here. This doesn't mean that I'm like not a creative person because 22 is way down there. It just means that all of these other ones are much more of a strength for me. So the one thing that I don't really love about the update here is that I haven't found a way to export this to any sort of a PDF or anything like that. But luckily, as long as your students create these accounts, it stays in there. Like their results will stay in there forever, and you can access it, from one day to the next if you wanted to do a multi-day lesson on this or anything like that. So that is the VIA character strength survey. So I hope that you find that to be helpful. All right, getting back into the presentation here. So the first skill that we're going to dive into here, and again, please feel free to pull out a pen and paper if you're old school like that. If that's what I would do if I was watching. I'm going to give you guys several ideas and recommendations. I hope you can tell by now I'm not just simply reading these slides to you guys, but I am going to try to be brief because, again, I'm trying to scrunch down 21 days of learning into this hour-long session by cutting it in half. But there's practical exercises to all of the skills that we'll go over, and I'm going to have those attached where you guys are viewing this. So we're just going to dive right in here to goal setting and then work our way on down the list. Like I said, our last skill will be putting it into perspective. So skill number 1, goal setting. This skill really helps us in building self-regulation. All right, remember that's a core competency. That's core competency number 2. So goal setting is something that very obviously, I'm going to give you guys some tips on how this can be used in the classroom. I actually did this with the class of 2020 when they were juniors. We had keystone testing and there was some white space in the schedule, and I was able to push in and do almost like a college and career readiness lesson with them by using the goal setting practical exercise that you'll see in the attachments. So this is something that you could use for any sort of goal, whether it is from an elementary age, starting to have those conversations about what their futures are going to look like, or like I said, kind of a maybe more direct translation there would be the secondary school age kids and what they're going to do post graduation. Right? What are they going to do with the rest of their life? Whether that's a career related goal, it could be a physical goal. A lot of students, whenever we did this, were talking about how they wanted the baseball team to win states or something like that. So when we talk about goal setting, making a kind of mental inventory here, and I'm going to say this several times, but you might want to pause the video here in just a moment to answer these questions for yourself. So when it comes to motivation, there's 2 sides of this coin. Think about the things that motivate you. Think about what do other people do to motivate you. Think about how do you motivate yourself, right? What motivates you to do the things that you want to do or have to do? And then that list is probably going to look a little bit different than when you answer the second side of that of how do you motivate others, right? And this is all situationally dependent, because if I'm motivating you to do well on a test or quiz in my class, it's going to look a lot different than if I'm motivating you to bench press 315 pounds, right? So motivation comes in many different formats, but the big key thing to point out here is that different styles and different techniques of motivation work differently on all of us, right? I might do really well if you criticize me. I might take that or accept that as a challenge. Whereas if you criticize someone else, one of my peers, they might just totally shut down, right? That might just totally turn them off. So it's important that you kind of see those things and understand those things, which I'm sure most of us do. Just like resilience, we have to figure out what the heck is motivation? What are these different types of motivation? So of all the slides in this entire presentation, this will probably be the one that I spend the most amount of time on because I think it's an extremely important concept to make sure that we can understand when we're trying to coach other people or when we're trying to get ourselves to reach or attain a goal or just be motivated to do something. So this circle over here, as you can see, it says intrinsic motivation. That is the sweet spot, right? Things that you are intrinsically motivated to do. No one has to force you to do it. No one has to kind of nudge you in the right direction. It's just something that you wake up, there's a passion that lives inside of you, and you say, I want to do that, right? That I want to go fishing. I want to whatever the want is, right? Whatever the desire is, maybe it's about your subject, right? I'm intrinsically motivated to learn more about history or to learn more about a particular subject. The downfall of intrinsic motivation is that most of us, we can probably count on one hand how many things we are intrinsically motivated to do, right? For the vast majority of tasks, right? Probably over 75% of the tasks that we are asked to do on a daily basis, we aren't intrinsically motivated to do those things. So if we can't be in that sweet spot over here in the orange circle, we want to try to get as close as possible to this. Okay. And just to be clear, this is talking about motivating someone for a long-term goal. There's going to be several instances here where we talk about different types of motivation, and you're like, well, I've done that before, and that works, right? That worked on a student, or that works for myself. Usually those things that are over here on the blue side, they work for short-term motivation, but after a while, the effects of those things are going to wear off. So in the blue side, we have our instrumental motivation, and then over here in the yellow, we have our internal motivation. Which again, that's as close as we can get to this sweet spot of intrinsic motivation. So one piece of motivation here that I would say you should try to avoid whenever we're talking long-term goals are rewards and punishments, right? We've all done that. We've all been, oh, hey, if you answer the question correctly, you get a sticker. Every time, maybe I'm training to run a marathon, and I say, hey, every time that I successfully beat my personal best mile time, I'm going to treat myself by buying something that I want, right? I don't know, maybe a new article of clothing or something like that. And then on the opposite side, right, a punishment. If I'm training to run a marathon and I don't go running on a particular day, right? Maybe I take 3 days off. Well, then I'm going to punish myself by not allowing myself to play video games all week, something like that. Those can be done, you can police yourself with those sorts of motivation, or obviously a lot of times in our profession, it's coming from an outside source, right? We may be the ones providing the reward or the punishment for somebody else. But like I said, in a long term, if I have a long-term goal of making sure that maybe it's a career-based goal or something like that, those rewards and those punishments are going to lose their luster pretty quickly. So we want to try to avoid that when we're having some long-term goals that we're setting for ourselves or that our students are setting for themselves. The other part of that is shame or guilt, right? And that might seem weird, but motivating yourself through shame and guilt that like, hey, I don't really feel like doing this task right now, right? I don't really feel like studying for the test, or I don't really feel like going to the gym. But if I don't do it, I don't want to have to live with the shame or the guilt that I'm going to feel, right? Like that's going to be enough to motivate me to do whatever that task is that I don't want to do right now in the moment. Again, that's obviously a good motivator sometimes, but most of the time, if we're looking for a long-term goal, we're going to stop having those feelings, right? If it's over a 6 months or 6 year period, we're no longer going to feel shameful or guilty about whatever we're not doing. So we want to make sure we can try to link it to our internal motivation. So moving on closer to our sweet spot here. If you value the behavior, right? So I may not, I'm going to just keep using different analogies. I may not love going into the gym every single day. I may not, want to go to the gym every single day, but if I'm a football player and I value, being good and being one of the best athletes on the field, if I value the fact that, hey, I don't really love going to the gym right now, but I do love in August whenever I can push people around the field, or when I can run faster than anybody, or I can break tackles, or whatever the case may be. If you value that, if you can tie those tasks and that value, that that behavior that you do value together, that is getting closer to where you want to be. And then the actual sweet spot here, as close as we can get to intrinsic motivation, as we can get without actually being intrinsically motivated, is to tie it to our self-identity. All right. So, for instance, if I say that hard work is one of my really big strengths, right? That's a core value that I have. I believe that people should work hard, right? That is something that is really important to me. Or even we use the example of you just saw my VIA character strength survey. You saw that honesty is number one, right? So if that's something that makes me me, right? That's my number one character strength. And I made a promise to myself, right? I made a promise to my family, or I made a promise to whomever that I was going to do a particular task. And then I'm just too lazy to do it one day, or I say that I'm too busy to do it one day. Well, if I can, in my mind, right, if I can tell myself, well, hey, if you break that promise, right, if you don't go do this particular task, you're breaking that promise, which is dishonest. And now you're going against the very grain of the things that make you you. So that is going to be the biggest motivator, more motivating in the long term than any of these things, right? If we can tie whatever it is that we're doing to our own personal self-identity and align those things, and that is going to really motivate us for those long-term goals. So those are the two sweet spots, right? Where you see the stars. Obviously, I would love it if I was intrinsically motivated to do every single thing that I needed to do, but that's just simply not the case, I would say, for all of us. So in order to be intrinsically motivated, or excuse me, in order to get the most out of ourselves, right? In order to capitalize and get ourselves in that optimal performance where we are motivated, we want to try to align those things with our self-identity. I put this here, so I made sure I summarized it well. The key concept, again, you want to make sure that the goals we choose to invest our time in are worthy of our full commitment, is to align those goals with our own personal values, right? If you can do that, and again, this requires a ton of self-awareness, right? This requires you to know what are your personal values, right? And I guarantee if you ask your student that this upcoming school year, they're going to have a hard time. They're going to struggle to come up with what their personal values are. I personally believe that if I asked a lot of adults, they would probably struggle to, just kind of at the drop of a hat, tell me what their personal values are. It's hard to put into words, but it's important that you know those things about yourself so that you can get the most out of yourself, right? And that you can actually attain those goals. You want to reach those goals. Everyone wants to achieve their goals. Everyone has goals, and no one wants those goals to become just hopes and dreams, right? We call them goals because we want to achieve them. They're things that we want. So that is kind of my spiel on motivation. So again, make sure to get the most out of yourself. You align those goals with your own personal values. Okay, those are all the benefits of internal motivation. That's that sweet spot that's closest to that intrinsic motivation as we can get. I'm not going to read those to you, but again, I think that all of us can understand that being motivated, tying things to our self-identity, having the fuel that we need to reach that long-term goal is obviously a good thing. So how do you do it? Here are our steps. All right, I'm going to pop 4 of them on the board right here, right now. So these 4 that are in purple, these are all in the planning phase, okay? So step one to this goal setting process, which is much more complex, and you'll see if you peel through the attachments here with the practical exercise. Step one is defining your goal. All right, we call this the end state. You have to know exactly what your goal is, what it is that you want to set out to do. All right, this has to be SMART. All right, so the acronym is SMART. SMART. S. It has to be specific. Okay, you can't just say I want to lose weight. I want to run faster. I want to be strong, right? Or I want to be smart. No, all right, it has to be specific. Okay, how can you get specific? Well, the M is going to help you out with that. It also, your goal should be measurable. All right, is it something that you can put some sort of a ruler up to say, did I meet the goal that I set for myself? Right, it can't be vague or ambiguous. So again, going back to if your goal is about being strong, you need to set some numbers for yourself, right? Oftentimes, the easiest way to give a measurement is to make it something that's attainable, quantifiable. So if it is a GPA, hey, I don't want to just be smart. I want to have a 3.5 or better GPA this school year, or whatever the case may be. All right, so that's SM. The A, it has to be action-based, right? It has to be something that you are doing. So you don't set goals for yourself of what you're not going to do, right? So just to give you an example, you wouldn't say, I'm going to stop eating junk food, right? Well, this process isn't going to work for a negative thing like that. You want to start eating healthier, right? I mean, and that's still too vague, but you want to flip it so it's action-based, right? Something that you're going to do. So SMAR, all right, it has to be realistic. If I'm someone who has not ran since my high school track days, but now at the age of 27, I say, hey, I want to run a marathon this year. That's probably not realistic, right? If I haven't ran a mile in the past 10 years and now I want to run 26.2, that's extremely tough, right? So you have to make your goals realistic. The same way in an academic setting, you don't want your goal to be that you graduate with a 4.0 and it's your junior year and your GPA, your cumulative GPA is 1.4. Not going to work, right? It must be realistic or you're just wasting your time. And then the T in SMART goals is time oriented, right? It has to be time based, meaning that give yourself a hit time, right? Give yourself, when does this need to be done by? Because otherwise, you're not really going to hold yourself accountable, right? If I just say, I want to be able to bench press 400 pounds, well, by when? By my 30th birthday, by the time I die? Like, what is the end state to that, right? When does that have to be by? So if you give yourself a time frame, a specific, and it could just be, maybe a particular year. It doesn't have to be like on this date. But the more specific you are with that time, the better. So you can make sure, that you're doing what you need to do to reach that goal. All right, so that's all end state. You have to have a SMART goal. Remember, SMART, that's the acronym. Step two, know where you're at right now. Okay, so understanding, identifying your strengths, identifying your weaknesses. What are those things that we should work on? Ties directly into step three, which is deciding what areas you need to develop. Okay, so really here, we're kind of just in step two, putting everything down to say, this is where I'm currently at. And then with step three, we're saying, let's focus on those things that I'm maybe not so good at, right? What are those priority areas where I don't know or I'm not very good at? Because those are the things I need to really work on right now. And then step four is actually making that plan for steady improvement. Okay, again, very deliberate process. It's kind of like setting mini goals for yourself. So they're like sub goals, right? So if my goal in step one, keep saying, is to run a marathon, well then in step four, when I'm making my plan for steady improvement, I'm going to be identifying different things and different steps along the way that I need to be taking to say, hey, I'm going to run at least 10 miles a week every week in 2020, leading up to whenever that marathon is. Again, you'll see in the practical exercise, it's very methodical. It is a long process, these steps 1 through 4 of planning. But they say if you don't plan if you don't prepare, you're going to fail, right? If you can't get that figured out and you just kind of dive headfirst into your goal and trying to reach your goal, you're not. It's kind of like going somewhere without a GPS or without a map, right? So you need to make sure you plan. The next 3 steps here, this is your actual action, right? This is what you're doing. So step 5, pursuing regular action, making sure it's something that you are consistently checking in with, making sure it's something that you are consistently doing, and that it's not something that you know, talk about and make this big grand plan but never come back to. Step 6, committing yourself completely, and then step 7, continually monitoring your progress. So making sure that it's something that you actually hold yourself accountable for, right? That it's some, we talk about this as teachers all the time with reflection being one of the most important steps in anything. You have to monitor your progress or you're really going to have no idea where you're at, right? How close or how far away are you from reaching that goal? You can see there's little catchphrases here for each one of these steps. So we'll just pop those on the screen here. So end state, energize, priorities, smart steps. Again, we already talked about the SMART acronym. Win, what's important right now, maintaining motivation, and IPR, in process review. The goal setting practical exercise, again, you can see that in the attachments. You'll see it labeled there. And that's something that I did with my students. Now, I will say it would need altered for a lower grade level, but I think the way that it is right now, in the format that you could be looking at it, I would say if anyone from middle school on up could use that. And I highly recommend that you personally would fill that out and do it for yourself before you just ask your students to do it. Because once you go through the process, you'll kind of see, oh, wow, that was really difficult to do, right? Like aligning my values or figuring out how I could leverage on my values to motivate myself. It was hard to come up with examples or ways in which I was going to do that. This slide, you're going to see this at the end of each skill. It is mainly for you, again, to press pause, maybe jot down some ideas. Maybe you've already been doing that. But I feel like I've already given quite a few examples on how it could be used in the classroom personally. But again, depending on the grades in which you teach, that could look a lot different. But like I said, I use this in a college and career lesson. I could also totally see this being something you do at the beginning of a school year to try to get students in the mindset of, hey, we're going to set goals this year, right? We're going to have you go through this process. So those are some things that I would recommend that for. Skill number 2, much more brief than goal setting. Goal setting probably will take the most amount of time. So if you're looking at the clock and you're saying, wow, geez, Garrett is like 40 minutes into his presentation and he's only on skill 2, you'll see that these next few are going to go rather quickly. So ATC is really a simple concept. It's going to seem so elementary when I show it to you, but when you think about the way that you approach situations or the way that your students think about them, they probably don't think about it like this. So the cardinal sin with ATC is that it needs to be ATC, right? It needs to be that there's an activating event, right? Something happened. That something is going to trigger some thoughts in your head, right? The little voice, the angel, the devil, whatever. Those thoughts are driving our emotions and our reactions. So many people, this is that cardinal sin, they think that the activating event, the thing that happened, is what made them get angry, throw something, lash out, whatever. But really, it was the thoughts that were in their head, right? The activating event triggers some thoughts in your head, and those thoughts drive your reactions, whether those are emotionally or physically. So, again, I already told you all of this, but that activating event is just anything that actually happens. It could be a positive event, it could be something challenging, it could be something really catastrophically wrong, or it could be something very, very minor. But that thing, right? I can't find my car keys, maybe something like that. That's going to trigger some thoughts, right? Those are your interpretations of what is going on. That's what you say to yourself in the heat of the moment. And those thoughts, as you record these, now you have to keep it within reason in school, but those thoughts should be raw and uncensored, right? Literally, what did you think when X happened to you? All right. So those thoughts that are going through your brain, they're going to drive how you feel and what you physically do. So here's an example. You right now, you are the I in this situation. I have to listen to this presentation. That activating event is going to trigger you to think, this is stupid. When will I ever use any of this stuff? Right? I'm putting all negative thoughts. Those thoughts are going to drive you to feel a certain way and do certain things. So maybe you're annoyed, you're irritated, you're bored. You may, as a result of that, be playing on your phone. You may be watching Netflix right now while I'm talking. You might zone out. You don't have any papers to grade, but if it was a school year, you might be doing that. So those thoughts are what drive those consequences, right? That's what made that happen. So a recap, right? You can totally see how you can spin this. So let's just do a real big example of that. So if you have to listen to this presentation and your thoughts are, this is valuable information, right? Or I can think of many ways in which I can use this in my classroom. That's going to drive your emotions to be excited, maybe, of using these things, hopeful, things like that. And then your reactions might be to be taking notes. You might be jotting ideas down of what you might use this for, right? So you can see that it's the same event both times, right? You're listening to this presentation no matter what, but it's the way that you interpret it, right? It's your thoughts that are going through your head that are driving those consequences. So A, T, and then C. All right, there is no AC. There's no arrow here for a reason. That activating event, no matter how good or bad, does not drive the consequences, right? Those thoughts do. So, can you control events? Typically, no, right? We're not able to control events. Things just happen, right? That's how life is. But you do have control over your thoughts. So, if thoughts are what drive our consequences, we want to make sure that we are trying to stay positive, right? We're going to try to make sure that we are having productive thoughts, right? We want those thoughts to be productive. That's one of the main points of all of resiliency, is to try to maximize or optimize all of your productive energy, right? Because as teachers, we have a million things going on. We don't have time for those non-productive thoughts. We don't have time to be giving ourselves anxiety or worrying or anything like that. We need to make sure that at every second, every hour of the day, that we are having productive thoughts, right? Whether it's in our personal life, whether it's in our professional life, how can we maximize our time, our efforts, our energy? Again, here's your slide. This shows you this skill is over. How can you use this skill in the classroom? That took me less than 5 minutes to go over with you. And maybe this is something at the beginning of the school year, you just point out to students that, like, hey, if you fail a test in here, failing the test could have totally different consequences depending on how you think of that, right? Or if you and I have a confrontation, that confrontation can make you turn sour really quickly and make you not have a great time in this class this year. Or, right, depending on what your thoughts are, you could have some positive consequences with that. So a lot of this is just really about making students aware, because maybe for some of you, you never really thought about the things that happen every single day, right? Every little instance, every single activating event, no matter how big or small, that's the order it goes in. You have something happens, you interpret it in your head, and then you react emotionally or physically. So moving on to skill 3, hunt the good stuff. Hunt the good stuff is, like I said before, basically science catching up with grandma. There's some work here by Dr. Slagman, Robert Evans, and colleagues, of basically that if you actually count your blessings, right? If you actually think about the silver lining, the good things that happen every single day, if you take 10 minutes to reflect on that, it can lead to better health, better sleep, feeling calm, better relationships, right? Lower depression, greater life satisfaction, all things that I would hope that all of us would say, yeah, I want that, right? Those are things I need more of in my life. So it's very simple. You can do this digitally, whether it's on like a Word document or a Google Doc. You could also physically keep a journal. I would recommend doing something where you're actually writing something down or typing something. If you just do it verbally, which is a common way, I would recommend doing that in addition to. But if you just did it verbally, like when you went home to your spouse or something like that, or if you called a friend, you're probably not going to do very well in the reflection part. right? So you just record 3 good things that happen at the end of each day. Do it before you go to bed, do it at the dinner table, whatever. But the key component here is reflecting. Why did this good thing happen? What does that good thing mean to you? What can you do tomorrow to maybe enable more of that good thing? And then what ways did you or others contribute to that good thing? All right, it's going to make you more grateful. It's going to help you build that optimism. And it's going to really just put things in the perspective that, no matter how good or how bad a day is, it's going to be all right, right? There was if you are struggling to come up with 3 things that happened that were positive that day, um, that's tough, right? So you want to get yourself in the mindset of doing that. We did it for the duration of the 21 days that we were there. Like I said, I would call my wife and we would kind of talk about it. And I guess I kind of voluntold her that she was going to do it with me. And, there were noticeable differences in our attitudes and in the way that we kind of approached each day. And, I think that it's something that could be something that's super simple to incorporate in your classroom. So you can see here, this is what practical exercise that is attached. Very, very simple, kind of plain Jane sheet here. Just good thing 1, good thing 2, good thing 3. There's many different ways and routes that you could go with this for hunt the good stuff. So how do you use it in the classroom? Again, take some time to reflect on that. Think about your individual situation with your particular group of students, whatever age level it is. How can you use that, right? How could that be something that you incorporate in your particular classroom? All right, skill number 4, energy management. Energy management, you see I got my picture here of Ricky Bobby from Talladega Nights with the cougar in the car. If any of you have seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, that's a good COVID-19 watch Talladega Nights. But if you can control your energy levels and make sure that you're kind of in the optimal zone for whatever the situation may be, it's going to make your performance that much better, right? So we'll talk about the eyes off here in just a moment, but getting into a bit of our instinctual tendencies here, we either have fight or flight, right, which we've heard a lot of, or we have rest and digest. So fight or flight is obviously the physical state that occurs in response to a stressor, right, whether it's real or imagined. So again, you can feel flight or fight whenever you are, put yourself in our students' shoes. You give a pop quiz, they have this fight or flight, right? It doesn't have to be, like a near-death situation or anything like that. But what happens to our bodies, right? We have decreased digestion, we have increased perspiration, increased energy activation, fast communication between the brain and the body. And in some instances, we want those things, right? We want those things. That's going to help us perform to an optimal level. But in other situations, and we'll go through a couple of examples here, we want this rest and digest, right? We want the physical state in which our body is at rest and results in slower breathing, slower circulation, a conservation of energy, right? Think about test taking or anything like that. That's when you want to try, you want to be calm. If the task that you're being asked to complete is, something physical, something strenuous, you might want, these things over here. But it's all about trying to make sure that there's not a disconnect, right? That your body isn't going into fight or flight mode whenever it really would perform more optimally in the rest and digest stage, and vice versa. So you want to be in this eyes off. All right. We'll look at that here on the next slide. But basically, it's depending on whatever your performance is. You can see down here on the y-axis, and then your energy activation here. Where do you want to be in this semicircle here? Are you putting forth too little, too much, or are you in that Goldilocks just right situation? So you can see with the practical exercise, that's what I'll use to teach this skill the most. To get into that individual zone of optimal function, that's that eyes off, you need to think about performances, right? Because this is going to look different depending on what your performance is. So like I said before, if it is a test taking scenario in an academic setting, if it's something that's physical, those answers here are going to look a lot different. So you want to identify emotions and then physiological reactions that are going to indicate too little, too much, and just right. It's really just about being aware, right? This is about knowing, hey, if I start sweating or if my hands clench together or my palms get sweaty or whatever, that might be demonstrating that I have too much energy going on right now, right? My energy level doesn't match what I need to be doing. And then the same thing, if I'm getting geared up to, running a track meet, but I'm like super lackadaisical, I like don't not really warmed up or anything like that, that's too little. Okay. This is very hard to do without taking one individual scenario the whole way through. But hopefully you kind of see what I'm saying here. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next skill. Very quickly before I do that, you can see here at the bottom here that we're incorporating that ATC model. That's the thought bubble here. So the last thing that you would do is identify a heat of the moment thought that would likely drive the consequences that you want, right? In that Goldilocks just right column, right? What thoughts need to be going through your brain? What thoughts do you need to be in order to get yourself in that just right segment of energy level and energy activation? So that way you can kind of be aware of that. You're kind of pre-gaming whatever it is, whatever the performance may be. Again, how could you use it in the classroom if you're noticing that you have a bunch of students with testing anxiety? If you notice that maybe students seem nervous or on edge when they come in or whatever, getting them to be aware and be able to identify that they need to get themselves in that just right energy activation, depending on what the performance is. All right, so skill 5. Before I go on to skill 5, this is your secret code here, and it is near the end of the presentation. It is GAM12. That code is if you are submitting a form for professional development. That is the code that you need to prove that you watched this. So if you've hung in here for the 55 minutes so far, sweet. Thank you. Just bear with me. We'll get through these last couple skills here. I hope you don't feel like you're bearing with me. I hope you're learning something. But there's my code. I'm going to leave it up here for, we'll say 10 more seconds. But again, just real quick while the code is on the screen, I hope that these are things that you can see that you can use them in your personal life, right? Because going with the title is teaching and leading with resilience, meaningful skills for you and your students. So this isn't about just like, oh wow, I want to put this in the classroom, right? These are things I want to give my students. That's good, that's great actually, but you need to focus on you too, right? So maybe some of that own self-development that you can become more resilient individual before maybe pitching it to your students. All right, there's the code. If you didn't get it, again, one last time, GAM12. Okay, so avoiding thinking traps is our next skill. Avoiding thinking traps is all about mental agility. We'll talk about the acronym FAT. This is one of the only times that you do want to be fat. Thinking traps are things, they sound exactly what they are, right? They're traps that people tend to fall into so that they want to try to get out of that way of thinking, right? You want to avoid those traps in the future, but in order to avoid those traps, just like if you were walking in the woods and there was a trap, you would have to know where it is, right? You have to be aware of it. So here's the definition for thinking traps. So thinking traps are overly rigid patterns in thinking that can cause us to miss critical information about a situation. So like it's like putting blinders on, right? We put the blinders on, we don't see the big picture. We're kind of like in this tunnel vision because of these thinking traps that we may have. So here's our ATC model. You can see how all this stuff kind of builds on itself. With our ATC model here, we're going to go that it's either a challenge, it's some sort of adversity or obstacle, or it could be a positive event. Again, it is anything. That is going to trigger some thoughts. Now, there are several categories here. Each one of these categories is its own thinking trap. And I really want you to think about, as I explain the differences between these things, which ones are you, right? Which ones do you tend to fall into? Which traps do you fall into, and under what circumstances, right? Because maybe every time something bad happens, you fall into me, because you're always blaming yourself. Or on the contrary, right, I can think of people who fall into this category as well, Anytime something goes wrong, it's them, right? It's everybody else. It cannot be me, right? And again, the way that we think about those, whatever the event is, that's going to drive us to feel and us to do certain things differently. So we want to try to get out of these traps. So what are these traps? Well, one of them is jumping to conclusions. And if you're jumping to conclusions, you believe that you are certain about a situation, even though you don't really have any evidence to back up whatever it is that you think, right? Somebody doesn't answer the phone whenever you call them, you automatically think that they are lying in a ditch somewhere, or that they hate you, or that they blocked your number, or whatever the case may be, right? You don't know that. They just missed your call, right? But you might jump to conclusions, and that's going to cause you to react in a certain way. So if you're someone who jumps to conclusions, we have some remedies for that. But let's explain the rest of these. The next thinking trap is mind reading, okay? Assuming that you know what another person is thinking, or you are expecting another person to know what you are thinking. All right, so it's a two-way street there. If you are someone who thinks you can read other people's minds, or that oh, I know that person's political leaning, so I know how they feel about X, Y, Z. No, you don't, right? If they didn't tell you, you don't know that. Or on the contrary, that you are saying something that's ambiguous, that's vague, but you are expecting that whoever it is that you're talking to knows what you mean. Or if you're just silent, you're expecting that they, know what you're not saying. So you're not a mind reader. Nobody else is a mind reader, right? That's up for debate. But in most situations, right, we don't want to make those assumptions. Me, talked about this one. This is my number one thinking trap, but believing that you are the sole cause of problems that you encounter, right? Taking maybe too much responsibility on whatever it is that's going wrong at that particular time. If you're a me person, that's not good, right? That's not healthy. You're being way too hard on yourself, because in most cases, a lot of those problems might be totally out of your sphere of influence, things that you have no control over whatsoever. Them is kind of the opposite of that. It's just believing that other people or other circumstances are the sole cause of each problem that you're encountering, and that it could not possibly have anything to do with you, right? You didn't contribute to the problem whatsoever. That's probably equally as bad as the last one, because now you're alienating people, or now now you have an inability to take responsibility for whatever it is that's going on. Always, one of our last thinking traps here is believing that negative events are unchangeable and that you have little or no control over them. So this is always happening to me, right? Woe is me, feeling bad about yourself, kind of having a pity party, that sort of thing. But thinking that, there's nothing I can do to change it. It's always going to be like this. Why does this happen to me? And then everything, okay? Believing that what caused the problem is going to negatively affect many areas of one's life. So, the kind of domino effect, downward spiral of this one bad thing happened, again, go back to the missed call. Whoever you called didn't pick up the phone. They hate you, and now they're going to make you lose your job, and now you're going to lose your house, and you're going no, right? That's probably not the case. But you might be someone who kind of tends to go into that way of thinking, that you start kind of catastrophizing whenever there's one little hiccup, right? So we want to avoid those. So what we can do is identify the pattern that we tend to fall into. Like I just told you, I'm a me person. And then each one of these is going to have a mental cue and a critical question that goes along with it. So those critical questions are really trying to get you to take those blinders off and see what you may be missing in that particular situation. So if you're someone who jumps to conclusions, and again, if you're someone who's jotting notes down or anything, obviously you can feel free to write down whatever you want. But if it were me, I would do, maybe press pause and figure out which trap I fall into, and then write down the cue and the question that goes with that particular trap. So if you jump to conclusions, you need to tell yourself to slow down, right? And the critical question you need to ask yourself is, what is the evidence for and against my thoughts? Kind of giving yourself that T chart, pro and con. What supports the idea that someone didn't answer the phone because they hate me? Is there any evidence that backs that up? Because why would I think that, right? And then what doesn't support that, right? What reasons do I have to go against that? That might kind of cloud your head a little bit, or get the cloudiness out of your head a little bit and say, okay, they probably just didn't pick up because they're busy. Something like that. So slow down, and then what is the evidence for, and what is the evidence against my thought? Mind reading. If you're a mind reader, or that you want other people to read your mind, you need to speak up, right? Did I express myself? Or if it's the other way, did I ask for information? So instead of just jumping to that conclusion that this person just needs to know what you're thinking at all times, did you do a good enough job articulating whatever it is you need to do? And if you're someone who thinks you're reading other people's minds, right, did you ask for clarification? Did you get the information that you needed? Speak up is the mental cue. And again, just went through the critical questions. Me. You want to look outward. All right, that's your mental cue, looking outward. So how did other circumstances contribute to the problem, right? If I'm feeling guilty about a particular situation, give you an example. So this past spring, with the closure of schools and everything, kind of abruptly, March 13th, last day in class, I was feeling a lot of guilt about the education that my students weren't receiving, right? That, oh man, it's my fault. I didn't do a good enough job preparing them for this. I should have let them know, right? I need to tell myself, hey, look outward. There's a pandemic going on, right? You didn't shut down schools. You didn't plan for this to happen, right? You didn't make this disease happen. So, take some of that off of yourself. Look outward and see how others or other things contributed to that. Them, just the opposite. You're going to look inward. Instead of just always pointing that finger, just say, what did I do, right? How did I contribute to the failure or the problem that I'm currently facing? Okay, always, you want to grab control. All right, what is changeable? What can I control? All right, we hear the catchphrase all the time: control what you can control. What is within my sphere of influence? Okay, instead of me thinking, oh, this always happens to me, everything's gonna, no, what can I control? And then lastly, if you're an everything person, you want to get specific, right? What is the specific behavior that explains the situation? What specific area of my life will be affected? So instead of going into that downward spiral, let's just specifically talk about the negative consequences of whatever the event is. Let's not take this into my personal life. Let's not take this into my professional life. Let's just think about this in a vacuum of specifically whatever is going wrong, what is going to be impacted in my life. Okay, this is our practical exercise here. You can see it really is just another ATC model. So activating event, you're just describing who, what, where, when. Your thought is your heat of the moment thought. And then because of that thought, right, what you want to do, so you want to write down your thought and you want to try to pick which of those thinking traps does that thought fall into. Does it fall into any of them or not, right? And then you want to think about what emotions are you going to be feeling if you have that thought, and then how would you physically react if you had that particular thought. And you're just going to, or you could have your students go through each of those thoughts that, several scenarios on what thoughts might be going through that. Maybe a good example of, or excuse me, maybe a poor example of them falling into a thinking trap, and then how could they correct their thoughts, right? What could they have thought that would make them react differently? Okay, how you could use that in the classroom. Again, if you notice that a particular, I've had this happen before. If you notice maybe a particular group of students or a particular grade level is blaming you for everything, right? Well, we're all failing Miller's class because he is a terrible teacher, right? Or he makes his tests too hard, right? Well, they're being them, right? They're not taking responsibility for that. They might be failing because they're not preparing. Right, so maybe it's reactionary, or you could do it proactively. Right, at the beginning of the year, be like, hey, here's these thinking traps that you might fall into at some point, whether it's in school or outside of school. All right, detecting icebergs. Detecting icebergs. This is going to be a quick one that we go through here. This helps you build self-awareness. It really has to do with you knowing about yourself, knowing whether it's a positive value or something like that that you're aware of, your core value, or whether it's a negative one, right? Those things. So they're core values and core beliefs that are kind of sticking up above the surface, but just like an iceberg, there's so much more beneath it that can really impact this. So one of, an iceberg that you could have, if you have a core belief or a core value that you should respect your elders, when you see someone disrespecting their elders, that is going to really set you off, right? That's really going to hit you hard because that's something that's core value to you. Same thing here, right? Going to a counselor means that you're weak. If you have that misconception, if that's something that you truly believe deep down, then anyone that you know that goes to a counselor, or if you yourself are someone who should probably go to a counselor, then you're going to have that kind of preconceived notion. So it's all about having that self-awareness, knowing what your core values are, what your core beliefs are. Maybe pause the video, take a second here to figure out what are your icebergs right now. When you do detect whatever your icebergs are, right? When you do jot down those core values, those core beliefs that you have, when it's crucial for you to hit the brakes and check this out is when your emotions or your reactions are out of proportion to what you're thinking in the heat of the moment. So again, it all goes back to that ATC model where we have the activating event, our thoughts, and then we have our consequences. Or the other situation in which you maybe need to look at your icebergs is if your emotion or your reaction surprises or confusing you. We call that a TC disconnect, meaning that we didn't have super counterproductive thoughts, but we totally lashed out, or we had a disproportionate reaction to whatever the situation may be. And then lastly, we need to detect icebergs if we notice strong thinking trap patterns. Again, if you're someone who continuously is falling into those traps, you need to kind of reel it back a little bit. So in order to detect icebergs, you want to ask these what questions, not why. What is the most upsetting part about that for me? What does that mean to me? What is the worst part about that to me? And assuming that this thing is true, what about that is so upsetting? So you ask those questions, or you do that with a buddy, right? You ask another person those questions. And you want to make sure you use those what questions, not why, because that why sounds confrontational, right? Think about that. Why did you react that way? Well, I don't know. I just did, right? But if you ask these what questions, it really gets to the bottom of why you did what you did, right? Or why you reacted the way that you reacted to a particular situation. So once you've identified whatever the iceberg is, that core value or core belief that is sticking up above the surface, you want to think about, is this something that I still believe, or is this something that is still a value for me? Okay. You also want to think, am I being maybe a little bit overly rigid in my thinking, right? Is my pattern, am I overly rigid in that thinking pattern, or is there something else? Okay. Is this iceberg getting in the way of some situations, and what specific actions you would take if you want to change your iceberg? So, if hard work is one of my core values and it's kind of a negative thing, right? Because when I see that people aren't working hard, when I would see people being lazy, I instantly have negative feelings toward them, or I instantly start treating them differently. Well, now that thing that most people would say is positive, yeah, Garrett likes to work hard work's one of his core values. Now that's kind of getting in my way and it's impacting relationships I could have. So you just really, it's all about being aware of who you are and how even things that on the surface may seem great, right? May seem like some of your biggest strengths, how they can kind of get in your way and make some confrontational situations. So is there a more direct conversation that you need to have with someone, and what is that conversation about? How could you use it in the classroom? I would say this one's a little tricky to discuss, especially, again, it all goes back to that character strength survey. And if your students don't have a good idea of who they are. And dealing with adolescents, that could probably change by the hour, who they are. But if you have students that you think are probably mature enough to have those conversations, it's important for them to realize that the things that might make them great might be getting in the way of, impacting their relationships with other people. So it's all about being aware of those icebergs, right? Just because I have that iceberg doesn't mean I have to get rid of it, right? If hard work's getting in the way of me, having a relationship with some of my students, having that connection with them, then that doesn't mean I need to stop valuing hard work. That just means that I need to be more empathetic, right? I need to understand the full picture. Maybe they're not working hard due to some extenuating circumstance. So really, it's just about being aware of if there's any sort of disconnect with that, right? That you are super ultra sensitive to a certain particular topic or a certain action, just so you get to the bottom of, why do I do that, right? Why does that bother me so much? So that's that. Skill 7, problem solving. Problem solving helps build mental agility. This is an extremely important one. I would say that next to goal setting, this is one that you could really do a methodical, practical exercise with your students. When you are an effective problem solver, again, you are someone who is looking at every single side of the situation. You really have to understand the problem before you can solve it. And the goal is to include any critical information that you might not have gotten at first. Again, taking those blinders off, so you understand the problem and you can really focus your attention on solution strategies. So the confirmation bias, it causes us to do two things. All right, it works both ways. It makes us notice and remember and weigh all the evidence that supports our thoughts and beliefs. So that stuff sticks. But it also tends to make us not notice or not remember or not weigh in any evidence that there is that supports our thoughts and beliefs. So that's called the Teflon effect. It just slides right off. So we see what we want to see, right? We hear what we want to hear. It's important that when we're tackling a problem that we don't just have that single side. It's that we get all of the evidence, right? We hear all of the voices. We hear all of those things, right, that either support or don't support whatever it is that we are thinking or doing at that time. So how the confirmation bias works, in case you aren't getting that, we interpret ambiguous information as being supportive as our thoughts and our beliefs. We don't actively go out and seek evidence that counters our thoughts and beliefs. We might weigh evidence for and against our thoughts differently. So like, we're going to stack the deck kind of. We're going to find the things that support our argument more. And then once we find evidence that supports our thoughts and beliefs, we tend to just stop gathering it, right? So if I get 3 opinions that match mine, I'm like, well, that must be the only one, right? That must be the right way. But really, we want to gather as much evidence as possible. It's not intentional. It's not within our awareness. We just naturally, instinctually do this. So the stronger our belief, the stronger the confirmation bias is going to be. You can think of a plethora of examples of when that may be true. In order to fight that confirmation bias, you need to kind of get out of your own skin for a minute, distance yourself from your thought, right? Write that thought down. You want to be kind of like a journalist here. You want to ask fair questions to gather evidence both for and against your thoughts, your ideas. And you want to get other opinions, right? Depending on whatever this problem is that you're doing, you don't want to work on this in a vacuum, right? You don't want to just see things from your perspective. You want to get as many perspectives as possible so that you can effectively solve the problem. So the steps here for problem solving. So what is the problem you're trying to solve? That is step 1, right? Understand that problem. What is the objective? Step 2, what caused the problem, right? You're answering the why. Why did that problem happen? And again, you're getting many different ideas on why that happened. Step 3, what did you miss? Okay, what weren't you originally thinking about? Step 4, what is the evidence that each factor contributed to the problem? So again, just weighing down that evidence. Step 5 is boiling it down to what really did cause this problem. And then step 6, what can you do about it, right? Thinking about what is within your sphere of influence, brainstorming possible solutions to that problem. So just going through these very quickly. Again, this is that step 1, who, what, where, when. Like, what is the problem? Step 2, heat of the moment thoughts about what caused the problem. And then you're going to create a pie chart to figure out, you'll see on the practical exercise, what percentage, right? Just a rough estimate. What percentage do you think that this factor was a contribution to the problem, or how little or how much did it impact it? Step 3, what did you miss, right? How did others or circumstances contribute? How did I contribute? And what specific behaviors contributed to the problem? That's going to help us take off those blinders and really see things for what they really are within this situation. Step 4, you're going to gather evidence to determine whether or not each factor identified in the previous steps were actually contributions to the problem, or if they were just things that you thought contributed but didn't actually. Step 5, you'll see in the practical exercise, you're going to list the factors that you found in support, and then list the factors that you think again, making that pie chart that you think really did contribute to the problem, and compare those things, your heat of the moment thoughts and the pie charts. Based on your new and more accurate understanding of the situation, you're going to identify action statements in order to solve the problem, right? This is that positive change. What are some solutions that you can actually pursue now that you fully understand the situation? How could you use that in the classroom? Again, it's much easier to do with individual examples. For the sake of time here, I'm not going to talk too much more about that. I'm going to get to the last skill. So last skill is PIP, putting it into perspective. Putting everything into perspective is really going to help you build optimism. We talked a little bit about catastrophizing when we were looking at those thinking traps. But what we do when we catastrophize is we waste energy just spiraling out of control about all of these worst cases of outcomes in a situation, and that prevents us from having purposeful thoughts and really taking and pursuing purposeful action. So you don't want to catastrophize. All right. So the 3 different styles are a downward spiral, a scatter shot, or if you're circling. So really quickly here, just to give examples of that, if I'm someone who's a downward spiraler, I might be thinking, one domino falls and then I just keep on going, right? If I stub my toe, right, the problem that all of us can probably relate to. If I stub my toe, I might downward spiral to think, if I stub my toe, I'm not going to be able to walk. If I'm not able to walk, then my wife isn't going to love me anymore. If my wife doesn't love me anymore, she's going to divorce me. If she divorced me, I'm going to live alone the rest of my life. If I live alone the rest of my life, I'm not going to be able to be happy. And if I'm not happy, I'm going to die an unhappy man, right? All of that because I stubbed my toe. That's a downward spiral. Probably a pretty extreme one, but you get the point. Scatter shot would be, I'm not necessarily going in a downward spiral, but I'm all over the place, right? If I'm worried about something, if I'm nervous, it's like a scatter shot, right? Like a pattern coming out of a shotgun. I'm all over the place in my negative thoughts. Like the boss sent me an email that says, come down here now, right? Come to the principal's office for a meeting. I instantly think I'm getting fired. I'm getting a promotion. Something happened to someone in my family. The boss loves me. The boss hates me, right? It's all of these, could be good, could be bad, but like my thinking is all over the place. It's not productive. It's really not helping the situation at all. And then circling is when you constantly come back to a similar thought. So just to give an example of that, same thing, you get that email from your boss that says, please come down here at the end of the school day. Your immediate thought is the one you're going to keep coming back to. If your immediate thought is, I'm in trouble, right? You might say, I'm in trouble. Well, maybe he just wants to talk. Well, I'm in trouble. Well, maybe he's going to talk to me about the upcoming, event that I'm planning. Well, I'm in trouble, right? You just keep circling back to that one thing that's kind of a negative thought. So that is not good. All 3 of those things create high levels of anxiety. They decrease focus and they increase helplessness. And again, it prevents you from taking purposeful action. Catastrophizing is not the same as identifying potential negative outcomes. That's a good thing to do, right? You want to have a backup plan, a contingency plan. Those things are productive, right? When you kind of think about what could go wrong, but catastrophizing is that to an extreme, right? There's nothing productive about catastrophizing. So Triggers of catastrophic thinking. If the situation is ambiguous, like the email I pointed out, hey, come down here for at the end of the day. If it's something that you value highly at stake, if you are tired, if you're run down, if you're depleted, if you already fear that certain situation, or if it's your first time doing something, right? Those 5 situations are when we tend to catastrophize more than usual. So we got 5 steps here for PIP. The 5 steps we can do to not catastrophize or to stop ourselves from doing that. We want to describe the event. We want to capture our worst case thoughts. We want to generate our best case thoughts. We want to identify most likely outcomes, and we want to develop a plan for dealing with the most likely outcomes. Okay, so really it's like a big I. We want to make sure that we can see the full picture, right? And then really kind of calm ourselves down to step 4. It's like, what's most likely? Okay, so we go to one extreme to the next. We capture the worst case thoughts. We kind of think of some best case scenarios of whatever the situation might be, and then we identify the most likely, and then we say, okay, if that's the most likely, what's my plan for dealing with it, right? So that is putting it into perspective. That can be done really quickly in your own mind, right? Think like, all right, worst case thought, best case scenario, what's most likely, let's move on from there. Again, you could use this in many different ways with your kiddos in the classroom. So recommended reading. For you to actually understand resilience a little bit better, these are, I don't know these people. This is not an endorsement that I'm getting paid for by any means. But these are 3 books that I read that I think really tie into, resilience is all around us in every one of our lives every single day. But these are 3 books that I think are fantastic reads. All of them are kind of historically based. But if you're looking for some summer reading, if this is a topic that interests you, I would highly recommend any of these. I'm not going to like rank them in any particular order. Resilience and The Obstacle is the Way are pretty similar. They're different enough that you could read one right after the other and it wouldn't feel like you're reading the same book. But Lincoln on Leadership is just fantastic. It's a bestseller for a reason. And I think that when going back to the title, Teaching and Leading with Resilience, we're all leaders, right? As teachers, we lead our students every single day. And especially in these challenging times that we're living in right now, seeing the way that President Lincoln handled a lot of the hardships that he faced and some of the creative ways that he was able to overcome those obstacles really can be like a roadmap or some guidance for all of us. So I apologize for running way over time. I got my timer here beside me. It says I'm at like an hour and 25 minutes. But I hope you learned something. I hope that you got something out of this. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If you want to use any or all of those practical exercises, like I said, they will be attached right where you're watching this video. So I appreciate it. I need to get back in here to close out my presentation. And that is the end of the session. So I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.